This episode brought to you by Cafe Imports, Minneapolis-based importers of fine specialty green coffees. Independently owned and operated since 1993, Cafe Imports has been dedicated to decreasing its impact on the earth through renewable energy, carbon neutrality, and by supporting conservational efforts in places where quality coffee is grown and also where quality coffee is consumed. Where does your coffee come from?
And by the National Parks of Lake Superior Foundation. As a nonprofit, we rely on support from listeners like you. If you like what you hear, please consider a donation. To learn more and make a gift, visit us at www.gosuperior.org.
Welcome to the Lake Superior Podcast. I'm Walt Lindala.
And I'm Frida Waara. We are made stronger by story, and there's no better source than the continent's largest body of fresh water, Lake Superior.
So join us as we highlight the 5 national parks that ring this greatest of the Great Lakes, meet the people, tour the places, and learn about the projects that make these parks and body of water so remarkable.
This podcast made possible with the support of the National Parks of Lake Superior Foundation and Media Brew Communications.
I'm Walt Lindala.
And I'm Frida Waara.
Welcome once again to the Lake Superior Podcast. Frida, you get excited when we talk to guests all the time. You are always ready to go and do these, but this one in particular, today with our guest Tim Clemens, you are particularly fired up. But I mean, this is actually a really interesting guest that we have here, but it sounds like it's going to be a fun conversation. But what's on our docket here today?
Well, this is the time of year. We're moving into fall. And that's the season of abundance. Well, basically, when you're a Youper, this is the only time you lock your car. Okay. You lock your car this time of year. Otherwise, you will just run into the grocery store, come back out, and it's filled with zucchini. You go to the post office, you come back, it's filled with zucchini. I don't understand it. Now, you and I know that not all food comes from a grocery store. Some of it comes from a farm. But when I met Tim, I realized not all the food even comes from a farm.
No, as a matter of fact, joining us on the Lake Superior Podcast today to talk about some of the things that are out in our woodland areas around the big lake is Tim Clemens. He is a professional forager and owner and operator of Ironwood Foraging. Welcome to the podcast, Tim.
Thanks for having me, Walt and Frida. Happy to be here.
I'm curious right off the bat, and I know Frida did a little pre-conversation with you, but all right, first of all, let's talk about professional forager. What is that, and then how did you end up doing this?
Yeah, professional forager, there's kind of 2 main kinds. One is somebody who procures wild ingredients such as mushrooms or nuts, flowers, or greens for restaurants or private individuals. And then the other one is someone who teaches these skills to the general public. I've been both, but I'm more of a teacher now.
And Ironwood Foraging is based out of where?
Yeah, we're based out of the Twin Cities in Minnesota.
Okay, so how did you get on this path? I mean, how did it come to be that you learned how to do this, and where did you kind of figure out that this was what you wanted to do?
Great question. I started my foraging journey with my identical twin when we were little kids. I want to say about 6 or 7 is my earliest foraging memory. I found a gooseberry bush in my neighborhood in South Minneapolis, and I ate it, and it was delicious and sweet, and I came back to it every year, and I wouldn't even know what a gooseberry was until my early 20s. That was just my fun tart fruit bush. But in my early 20s, foraging became an actual practice. When I was studying Ojibwe language at the University of Minnesota, we had to do a project about traditional Ojibwe activities, and it just so happened to be the Ojibwe New Year at that time, which is what everybody else calls maple syrup time or sugar bush time. So I was making maple syrup, and it was the coolest thing ever, and that just started me on this path. I taught myself how to do it, pursued a lot of teachers, read a lot of books, and I didn't die, so that's the most important part.
Okay, yeah, all right. Yeah, that was actually where I kind of wanted to go here. As you said, as a kid, you found a bush with what looked like berries on it, and you ate them. I mean, that could have some risk to it. I mean, let's be honest right there. But I mean, okay, you got lucky on that one. But I mean, it turned into a career and it turned into a pathway. But how did you learn about, I guess, basically what you can and you can't eat or shouldn't eat? I mean, we'll talk a little bit more about how you got into it in an urban setting and stuff, but just on its basic level, how did you just kind of learn how to say, okay, this is edible, this one isn't?
Well, much like every bite of food that's ever made it to our mouth is an unbroken story told from human to human since the earliest times. We have always learned that food is edible from other people. Science has never studied a food into edibility. We've always eaten food and studied it later. Of course, if you are foraging, we don't really have that tradition so much anymore. If you do, you're very lucky, but most people don't. So you need to seek an expert. You need to identify the species you're trying to eat before you eat it. Yes, I did get lucky with that gooseberry and a few other things, throughout my teen years. But you really should identify something first because there are things that can hurt you.
And when you talk about things that can hurt you, I mean, I love picking berries. There's nothing that's so rewarding. It's wonderful. I'll even fire up some ramps and some fiddleheads and those kinds of things, but I'm scared to death of mushrooms. Tim, help.
Yeah, mushrooms are something that we don't really have an intuition for. Consider plants. When you were learning your ABCs, you probably learned A is for apple, B is for banana, and C is for carrot. Mm-hmm. We didn't learn that A is for amanita, or B was for Bondarzewi berkeleyi, and we didn't learn that C was for Cortinarius, okay? Those words don't mean anything to us. So you do have to really start more at square one with mushrooms than you do for plants. But you can. It's possible. I didn't know a single thing about mushrooms, so if I can learn it, you can definitely learn it. Seek out your local mycological society. They have a lot of experts that have spent their entire life hunting mushrooms safely, effectively, and that's probably the best place to start.
Now, you mentioned that you're a professional forager, and you mentioned being lucky to have a forager if there's someone or someone. You mentioned that. Do we need more? Is this something that isn't a very, common thing?
You know what? I find that the more I learn about it, the more common it seems. I meet a lot of people that, they learned from their grandparents or their parents took them out. But really, I want to say in the city, at least in my experience, Minneapolis has something like 80% of the population of Minnesota. And I don't meet a lot of foragers, and I didn't meet a lot of foragers until I became one. So I do think it's uncommon. We do need more foragers because when you are foraging, suddenly, say you have a favorite park. You love the trees, you love the atmosphere, but maybe you don't know how to identify them. And maybe you can kind of go to any park. There isn't something necessarily about that park that you can identify as being important to you. But when you're a forager, suddenly it's your chanterelle patch. Maybe you go somewhere and it's your blueberry patch. And it's not an inanimate backdrop for human activity anymore. You can walk your dog anywhere, you can mountain bike anywhere, but you're going to be attached to individual trees once you're a forager. That means you're going to protect them. You're going to pick up trash. You might donate to whatever land management organization is protecting that land, and you're just going to be a better naturalist for that.
We don't think of areas as you've already described yourself, Tim. You're a city kid and you're foraging in urban environments. For us, it seems like, oh yeah, we can find those wild blueberry patches all along the lakeshore. It's just fabulous. And we can get into those jack pine forests and it's just loaded. But do you really find foraging areas in the city?
Oh, yeah. I mean, you can find, surprisingly, edible plants that are in the shadows of the skyscrapers in downtown Minneapolis. Not to mention that there are planters, there are, very small green spaces, and that is the most human-impacted area, right? And it could be better than it is now. Those planters could be bigger. They could host native species. They could provide food for people, and they'd look a lot prettier too, especially if people cared about them more. And then moving out into more of like the residential area, we have more green space and more accessible green space than any large city. So our park system could be an example for any other large city. And, every person in Minneapolis lives within a half mile of green space, and there's tons of stuff there. We don't spray the parks anymore, so you can have a dandelion right out of the green area, or you can eat some clover, or you can pick Kentucky coffee tree pods. It really is just a smorgasbord.
We're talking with Tim Clemens today on our Lake Superior podcast. He's a professional forager, owner of Ironwood Foraging out of the Twin Cities. Tim, you mentioned a moment ago that you kind of got into this through some indigenous language studies. And if people are familiar with indigenous culture, they know that also there is a mentality that you kind of touched on with being respectful of the trees and the earth in a way that carries on for 7 generations. It is to protect it and to keep it, but also to know that there's harvesting there, and there is a way to get the food and the sustenance from these trees and from the earth. How much of that kind of mindset came into what you were learning? Because it sounds like it's a part of what you're talking about now in just terms of how it changes your perspective on just what's all around us.
Yeah, when someone plants a hickory nut tree, for instance, you're not necessarily planting it for yourself. Mm-hmm. Maybe the earliest harvest you're going to get from that is 15 years, but it might be small. You're really looking for, 40 years out. So you start thinking of that life is bigger than you and that you will have legacy. And planting a hickory nut tree for your grandkids or for people to enjoy for the next 300 years, that's an amazing legacy. I can't think of a lot of things you can do that can have that kind of impact for that long. And I just think that if we all get together, if we all become foragers, people are fundamentally good. The universe is fundamentally kind. And when people know better, they do better. And when we see the world through this lens, we are going to do better for everybody.
Tim, I appreciate that so much. Can we forage anywhere? I mean, can we go on state and public lands and forage? Or do we have to have those areas in our own boundaries?
That's such a great question, and it's one that's difficult to ask. In Minnesota, that's where I'm most familiar with the very, kind of the labyrinth of foraging laws. Mm-hmm. We are allowed to harvest for certain things on state park and state forest and wildlife management areas. And those are typically fruit, nuts, berries, and mushrooms. So as long as something's a fruiting body, we are allowed to harvest them for personal use, not allowed to sell them, but there are tons of places where you can't harvest. In Minneapolis, you can only harvest fruit from trees. In St. Paul, which is the other twin of the Twin Cities, you cannot harvest anything. And then that will vary from city to county to other units of state land. And really the best thing is just call ahead and ask if foraging is allowed and what for.
Do you know what the consequence would be if you were picking an apple somewhere?
I think life in prison.
Well, there you go. Adam and Eve just set it all up, didn't they?
I like that. I'm hearing a lot of conversation here with you, a lot about education, learning about this, learning that you have done this and through your own experience, but also understanding that you share that information through your company, Ironwood Foraging, and what you do. Talk about that a little bit. I mean, first of all, as you put it all together to learn it, how do you now impart this on people as well?
Yeah, so the city might seem like a weird place to teach what is fundamentally thought of as this, wilderness skill. But I find that the average person's backyard or park closest to their house is the best place to learn. As I said before, about 80% of people live in the Minneapolis metro area. So I figured if I wanted to make a change, I had to target the most amount of people and focus my efforts there. So my radius is about 1 hour from Minneapolis. I teach probably a little over 1,000 people in person every year. And then I teach many more online with our DNR program here. Actually, I just taught a mushroom class this winter to 1,500 people on the internet at one time. So it was a pretty cool crowd. Everybody's interested in foraging. There's no one demographic that I target or that comes to my classes. It truly is everybody because, hey, everybody likes food.
Yeah.
So
right.
This is something that just speaks to everybody across all boundaries. So, I work with a variety of organizations. I've taught classes such as American Sign Language, English as a second language classes, in a course that we developed called Nature for New Minnesotans. So if somebody is a first-generation immigrant here, we get them from all over the world. They're interested in what they can eat. They want to engage with Minnesota. They want to know what Minnesota is. That's such a fundamental part of the human experience. So we take them out and help them learn English by learning what our plants are, how you talk about the plant parts, and most importantly, how you eat them.
That's such a cool way of doing that.
Kidding.
I mean, that really actually is a sort of a unique hands-on way, a great perspective on it. Has there been a change in an attitude about learning about foraging as people's awareness about, or at least wanting to know where their foods come from with farmers markets and less processed foods and things? I mean, here where we are in Michigan, in the Upper Peninsula, where we're recording this, there has definitely been in the last 10 years in particular a shift in a lot of people wanting to shop at farmers markets, wanting to shop directly from the farms, wanting to get, whether it's some meat or something processed from a local farm. How much has that had an influence on what people want to know about foraging?
Foraging has gotten so much more popular. And just like the farm to table movement, kind of the next iteration of that is the forest to table movement or the prairie to table movement. It's getting as close as possible to your food. And, foraging used to be called it used to be stigmatized. People would call it scavenging and have a negative connotation. But people are really getting excited about this for a variety of reasons. I couldn't even list them all. But it now is enjoying somewhat of a celebrity status in the food world. I mean, even the perennial powerhouse Noma in Denmark, they just got done with 8 years of investigating foraging and selling it at one of the premier restaurants in the world. So this is free food. It's more responsibility, but it is monetarily free, and it's also the best food in the world that you can only get if you're a forager.
When you talk foraging, and for the most part, what we've been talking about are the wild edibles that are coming from plants. But Tim, I got to ask you, do you eat bugs?
Oh, yeah, I do. And I probably just lost plenty of people, but hear me out if you stuck around. I do, and I think one that people find most accessible is the Japanese beetle. It's kind of that black, greenish copper beetle that is eating your garden all summer. Mm-hmm. It's a non-native invasive beetle that we can eat too. Now, you got to cook it first. I boil mine for 5 minutes. Food safety is important, just like any other food. But when you do cook it, then you just marinate it in whatever you want it to taste like. Like, I really like a Cajun garlic or a tequila lime, and you can also candy them. And then you let them sit overnight. Then you dehydrate them in your oven or a dehydrator, and then they're just like crunchy popcorn. There's no bug flavor.
I know. I can really see that. I can see that.
Oh, you're weird.
Frida's got this look on her face, but
well, you eat head cheese, don't you?
Yeah, they probably don't ask you to do a lot of bring to potlucks and stuff. Probably do they, Tim? But it's there. I mean, it's there, and you can do it, and it's getting over that initial fear. And then maybe also if you're harvesting an invasive species, you're kind of in your own small way helping out.
You really are. And you know what? Everyone does have this initial reaction. Even I did, too, when I first tried them, that it's going to be, what am I about to do? And then the funny thing is, I'd say 99.9% of people always go back for a second one.
Sure, why not? You made it through the first one. Wasn't so bad. Tim Clemens is with us on the podcast here today. He's a professional forager and the owner of Ironwood Foraging in the Twin Cities. You live in the Twin Cities. We're talking a lot of stuff around the urban areas and things that you've been doing. Obviously, you get out into the green spaces, but getting out around the Great Lakes, getting around Lake Superior in particular, to kind of tie it back to our main body of conversation, the lake. What are options for foraging around the lake as you're near the lake shore or you're in some of the tributary areas? What grows there? What's good?
Oh, I'm so glad you asked. So it is a drive for me to get up there, but there are 3 main places that I really love foraging around the western part of Lake Superior where I'm at. The first would be Grand Marais. I love finding mountain ash berries up there. There's this really cool apple relative that has these clusters of orange berries, and they go really good in Like you can infuse vodka with them, and they make a really cool drink that's popular in Poland. You can also dry them and grind them for flour. We have a really cool one that we're planting now that's called oak leaf mountain ash, and it tastes like milkweed flowers. It's so good and floral and sweet. And then in Superior, Wisconsin, there's a high bush cranberry, our native high bush cranberry. So it's like these little cranberries growing on a bush instead of in a cranberry bog. Mm-hmm. Those are so delicious and bright. I love making a habanero high bush cranberry hot sauce every fall. So there are also in northern Wisconsin, I love going to the barrens and picking blueberries, of course.
So when we talk about this now, I'm hearing there's a couple of lines I'm going with this. One is that here at Northern Michigan University, where my wife works and is in the Center for Native American Studies, about 10 years ago, they did a cookbook, a project called the Decolonizing Cookbook. And what it was basically creating dishes and foods out of things that were naturally here. And it had a lot of these types of things of using the berries and using all of the, like teas made from cedars and trees, other things. This has been here as long as we have been here as people. What is it now that you're thinking that is connecting with people when they want to hear from you and learn about this? What is the sort of the thing that keeps it modern and interesting for people?
You know what? That is such a profound question, and I'm not sure I know the answer to it, but it must be something about our culture right now, and I think it might have something to do with the fact that I feel like we've never been less connected to plants and mushrooms and just basically everything outside. I think people are always on their screens. There's always a glowing rectangle influencing you, and then imparting a message to you, whatever that may be. And I think there's just this natural push and pull that we're kind of rebelling against that. And we want to go outside and we want to feel good. I mean, nature has no opinion of you. It doesn't judge you for anything. And it's beyond your control. And I think a lot of people, we're kind of told we can control everything. So it is this really freeing feeling to just go outside. And then I think people have always been smart for all of time. So you bring your natural creativity and your own past into any area you're in. And I think that's just a natural progression of people going outside more.
Yeah, but Tim, does your passion for foraging make it so you just don't take a simple hike anymore?
That's correct. I can remember what it felt like to not be a forager, but it gets more fuzzy every year. It's like I walk by so many friends in the forest, and like individual trees, but also whole tree species and the mushrooms that grow with those trees. And I'm not seeing what's just there right now. I'm seeing what has been and could be and, maybe will be long after I'm gone. So it's much more rich. There's a depth that I'm seeing now that I never saw before. There's actually this line by one of my favorite comedians. He said, "Do you think the wind is trying to tell us something, but we just forgot how to hear it?" And that was supposed to be a joke, but I really took it seriously. It actually does feel like that. Like I am experiencing a language that I was previously deaf to.
Yeah. Now here comes the flip of that. How does Tim Clemens, professional forager, go to the grocery store when he does?
You know what? I go to a grocery store like everybody, but there are things I never buy anymore.
Sure.
I don't buy fruit. I don't buy greens. I don't buy mushrooms, and I don't buy nuts. And for most of the year, I don't buy rice because I harvest my own.
Okay. Yeah. I was going to ask about wild rice up in the Minnesota area that way and everything, how much that is a part of the culture there. So it's interesting because you say you don't buy the stuff that I think the average person just thinking, wanting to quote unquote buy and eat more healthy would be getting the fruits and the vegetables and the greens and the nuts. But your relationship has changed that for you, which is real interesting. Tell me about that a little bit. Why don't you buy those from the store?
Yeah, I don't buy those because they are so plentiful outside, and they're also fresher. So I have access to, they cost less, and they are a better product at the end of the day. If you're getting a lot of nuts from the grocery store, I actually find that they taste a little bit rancid. Like they're not toxic or anything, but the oils in them are no longer fresh. If you break open a black walnut, or you get really lucky and you break open a butternut or like a shagbark hickory or something like that, you can taste just absolutely how fresh, at the peak of freshness, this nut is. And then you go in the grocery store and you kind of smell a walnut there, which isn't even a native species. It's probably like the English or Persian walnut from however thousands or many miles away. You can taste the difference right there. If you get greens from the store, maybe they're wilted, maybe they've been transported hundreds of miles to get to you, days and days to get to you. But you can pick them, you can pick them and then eat them in under an hour. Or just right to your face. You can go full giraffe mode. That's cool too.
Full giraffe mode. I love it.
Yeah.
You know, Tim, I have to ask you, because you're Minneapolis is your home, and you're primarily foraging within an hour of that home. But is there any place in this world that you would just love to go and take your skills and just explore?
So the world feels bigger and smaller as a forager. I see relationships like across country lines and state lines that I didn't really see before until I started paying attention to the plants. So I kind of see the world differently in that way. And there are similar things across continents and between them, but it's also huge because I see the immense variety of foods that you can live your entire life and never even hear about, right? But I think I would probably go to Oaxaca, Mexico, if I had to choose one place. It has such a cool food culture that they eat mushrooms, they eat tons of forage foods, and they also eat insects. So that would kind of check all my boxes. But I would really go anywhere.
Yeah. So as you are a professional forager and you've got Ironwood Foraging in the Twin Cities, Tim, how can folks learn a little bit more about what you do, maybe find out about some maybe online learning options if they just want to find out a little bit more? What's there for you to offer? How can they find out more?
Yeah, you can find out about my in-person classes and my presentations and speaking events at ironwoodforaging.com. And you can also find me on any social media, either as Ironwood Foraging or as Minnesota Forager, MN Forager.
Okay. And you have options there for online if people are at least curious, or maybe you can at least point them in the right direction to learn a little bit more, right?
Absolutely. Always open for that.
Yeah. Well, hopefully we'll get some folks from around the world that are listening that just say, hey, I heard you on the podcast, and find out a little bit more about what's going on.
And, you know, Tim, earlier today when we were talking to Tim, I just wanted folks that you could share with them that you are a consultant for the state of Minnesota poison control, too. A little bit, just so folks know, you know what's good for you and what's not. What your role is with the state.
Totally. So I am the consulting mycologist for the Minnesota Regional Poison Control System. So it is a fast, free, and confidential service that you can call into. And if you think you've eaten something that, you shouldn't have eaten, just call, take pictures of what you're eating. And, I don't get any of your information. So if you took one of my classes and you're worried that I'll think you weren't a good student, don't be afraid. I won't get any of your identifying information. I just look at the photos and, we try to see if you're in trouble or not.
It's real interesting how you've got that. A lot of information there. Tim Clemens with us on the podcast today, professional forager. Again, the website for your business, Ironwood Foraging, is what?
Yeah, ironwoodforaging.com.
It's been a pleasure having you on today, Tim. Really, there's a lot of info. I feel like we've just scratched the surface with you, but this is your thing. I can tell. It's really cool talking with you about it.
We want you to come over for dinner.
Yeah, come over for dinner. Yeah, that's it. So.
Don't bring bugs. Just
I'll bring the bugs.
Bring the bugs. That's okay. Thanks again, Tim. Really appreciate it. And hopefully we'll get a chance to talk with you again sometime soon.
Thank you so much for having me.
It's Tim Clemens, professional forager, owner of Ironwood Foraging in the Twin Cities. Frida, we always talk with folks on this podcast that are into what what we're talking to them about, whether it's something with one of the lighthouses or it's something with some of the traditional and native thoughts or whatnot. Tim here was really just interesting to talk to because it sounds like he had an interest, but he kind of took an interest much beyond, I think, just the average sort of, well, I know I can eat this, so I'll get the raspberries in the backyard and call it good, right?
I mean, since he put a whole new spin on home ec,
right.
Going back to a cooking class, let's just think about this. But I love the line that he shared, Walt, when he said, do better when you know better. And I think that as he was explaining how this just gets to be layered, at first it's a kid, he and his twin,
Right.
with some gooseberries, and look where it's developed into.
Right.
And he's reaching, thousands of people in a season, teaching them what's in their own backyard.
It's interesting, though, if you have any real insight into indigenous thought and that sort of thing, what he was talking about was learning that we, as a majority society, have lost the connection to the earth, and not just the animals, but the trees, the plants, all of this that we have all along Lake Superior, all along the shorelines, and all along this region that we talk about. But this reminds me of when we talked about way back about what's below the surface of Lake Superior.
Oh, yeah.
Right? And all of the life that's down there. We have this all around Lake Superior and this region where the lake is. And it's an opportunity through someone like Tim here with his teaching of foraging to learn a mindset that says that it's so much more than us. It's so much more than what we think it is, and it's very important to stay connected. And hopefully with this conversation today, we've gotten some folks out there, somebody like you listening right now that says, I want to do this and find out a little bit more. As always, of course, if you've got an idea that you want to share with us as a possible topic, find us through the National Parks of Lake Superior Foundation. Let us know, because we're always looking for conversations here on the podcast. But, this was really a fun one, Frida. I'm glad you were able to find Tim and give us a chance to hear from him. So that was really cool.
Yeah, fun stuff.
All right. Well, that's going to pretty much do it for us for this latest podcast. Make sure, of course, you can check all podcasts out through the National Parks of Lake Superior Foundation and their website. I'm Walt Lindala.
I'm Frida Waara. Thanks for listening. The National Parks of Lake Superior Foundation, NPLSF, is the only official nonprofit 501c3 fundraising partner of the National Park Service for all 5 U.S. national park sites on Lake Superior.
To learn more about NPLSF projects and programs, you can visit the website at nplsf.org or friend them on Facebook.
I'm Frida Waara.
And I'm Walt Lindala. Thanks for listening to the Lake Superior Podcast.
This podcast made possible with the support of the National Parks of Lake Superior Foundation and Media Brew Communications.
This episode brought to you by Cafe Imports, Minneapolis-based importers of fine specialty green coffees. Independently owned and operated since 1993, Cafe Imports has been dedicated to decreasing its impact on the earth through renewable energy, carbon neutrality, and by supporting conservational efforts in places where quality coffee is grown and also where quality coffee is consumed. Where does your coffee come from?
And by the National Parks of Lake Superior Foundation. As a nonprofit, we rely on support from listeners like you. If you like what you hear, please consider a donation. To learn more and make a gift, visit us at www.gosuperior.org.